Okay.
Yeah,
Is it okay?
sorry.
Okay. So I'll get back to my story. So I got a phone call from Carol, my receptionist, and she said, Keith's at Southby Road Station, which is literally 5 minutes from my surgery. Would I mind waiting? So I thought, okay, I'll wait for him, but I'm not going to wait all day. After about 5 minutes, Keith rushes in, he's red-faced, he's panting. I had to take his blood pressure. So I thought, oh God, this is going to take a while. So I let him talk. He told me a few things. And all of a sudden, about what was going on in his life. Then all of a sudden, he gives me this quizzical look. He cocks his head to one side and said, I've got this man here. And he says, he knows you. He says he's your grandfather, the one you never met. And he wants to tell you something. And that really got my attention. So this is my grandfather. This is a picture of him on Brighton Beach about the year 1920. I was in the middle of quite a nasty row within my family, which had estranged me and my wife from my parents and my sister, and it caused me much pain. I'd probably be going through a couple of years of it by then. And with my training as a GP, I realised that this was a family thing. My cousins had similar problems with their parents, and I interviewed my uncles and my aunts, and I realised that it was probably my grandfather, the one I'd never met, my mother's father, who'd caused the problem in the family. He had a bakery shop in Cable Street in London. And if any of you have ever heard of the Battle of Cable Street, when the fascists marched through and they were repelled by the Dockers in about 1936, his shop was used as a first aid post for that. It's quite a famous incident in London East End history. But my grandfather was very fond of the races, and unfortunately, at the end of the week, he'd put his hand in the till, take out the takings, and then blow them all. So it was quite interesting that Keith had actually mentioned this. So instead of me thinking he was crazy, I did think he was a little bit crazy. In fact, I thought actually I'd have to phone the psychiatrist and get him sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And I didn't want that because that's not a nice thing. And also it really screws up your day. That can take hours. And I really just want to get on, do my home visits and then go for a swim. But he piqued my interest because he mentioned something about a person that I had been researching. So I said, oh, okay, Keith. I said, how come you've never told me that you speak to spirits before? And he said, well, you don't normally you wouldn't tell your doctor this, would you? He'd think you're mad. I thought, well, that's true. I did think he was mad. But I thought, well, let's see how far this runs. So he said, now listen, I'm going to tell you what he's telling me. But if I say anything that you find upsetting, it's not me, it's him. Okay. I said, okay, we'll spit it out. He just sort of cocked his head to one side again, as if he was listening to someone over his shoulder. And then for the next 20 minutes, he told me in excruciating detail everything that was going on in my life. He couldn't possibly have known this. And then said that it was going to be fine eventually. And then suddenly, at the end of it, he'd finished. I think my jaw was on the floor. After I sort of closed my jaw, he said, was that all right, Doc? I said, Keith, that was amazing. He then said, my spirit guide, William, said, what's the spirit guide and who's William? He said, oh, William was my boss at the BBC. When he died, he became my spirit guide. And then here we are. I thought, we're in cuckoo land again. He said, you should be doing this. I said, what? He said, listening to spirit. I said, what do you mean listening to spirit? He said, doing what I'm doing now. He said, you're like a man on the edge of a cliff. Don't be afraid to take a leap of faith off that cliff. They'll catch you. And with that, he left my room. And I was just sat there aghast. Now, it's interesting he talked about the man on the edge of a cliff, because if you look at the symbolism of the tarot, which is something I researched later, if you look at the major arcana, which is symbolically meant to be the journey of the fool. You start off with the fool and you end up with the world. This is a man on the edge of a cliff. So the question is, was I on a fool's errand, or was this the journey of a wise fool, someone who gathers wisdom? So let's see what happened. Actually, things kicked off pretty quickly, and it started with the dream. Now, I know it's boring to tell dreams, but this one was quite important to me, so I will tell it briefly. I was, soon after Keith had given me this message, I was sleeping one evening, and I found myself in this dream. I was at my aunt's house. My aunt used to have these lavish dinner parties. She'd have a long dinner table with a white tablecloth. And in my dream, I was sitting opposite my cousin Carol, who's a psychotherapist. For some unknown reason in this dream, she was trying to get me to do a chest x-ray on one of her patients. And I remember saying to her, in my dream, I can't do a chest x-ray, and I'm not psychic and I can't see auras. And all of a sudden to my left, I heard a Cockney voice say, of course you can. I looked to my left, and there was at the end of the table was a short, dumpy Indian man, like a guy from India, but with a Cockney accent. And above his head was a wall light with crystal on it. And with that, he turned around, flicked the switch on, and these blue gem-like shafts of light came out. And he said to me, what do you do with all that blue? And I just said, matter-of-factly, as if I'd forgotten it, oh, I give it to people. And with that, I just burst into tears and woke up. And I woke my wife up and said, I just had this really weird dream. Do you think I'm going mad? She said, well, it doesn't matter. I still love you. So I knew it wasn't ever happening. I'd have someone to rely on my journey. And that was interesting, but not, but I mean, it was just a portent of what was going to happen. The next thing was I was at work one day, and it actually was it was when my son's GCSE results were going to be released. So the plan was I get in and do my morning surgery, and I'd get home quickly just to see what his results were. So I decided I'd go into my surgery. I threw my keys on the desk, and I'd look in the visit book to see if I could do any home visit before I did my surgery, so I could get away quickly. There's one visit around the corner. I didn't need my car, so I didn't pick up my car keys. I just threw them on the desk, and I picked up the patient's notes and left my room. As I left my room, I felt a blow to the back of my head, and I heard a voice, and the voice said, pick up your car keys, they're going to get stolen. And I just thought, this is nonsense. I just, rushed off to the house. In fact, I went to the wrong house because I was in such a hurry. Eventually went back to the right house, saw the patient, got back to my surgery. As I went into the surgery, my receptionist, Anne, said, have you got a blue Corsa, Ian? I said, yeah. She said, well, we've just chased a couple of youths out of it. They got into your room and took your car key. And I said, oh, I knew that was going to happen. And Anne said, well, why didn't you take your keys with you? And I said, I don't know. But I heard a voice telling me. She gave me a funny look. So what happened is they picked up my car key, and they'd flashed it, seen which car it belonged to, got into the car, but because it was an automatic car, they couldn't steal it. They locked it, run off with the key. The problem being is that they may have taken some controlled drugs in the car, and they may have taken the prescription pad. We didn't know. And they ran off with the key. So what do you do when that happens? Well, I'll tell you what you do. You have to contact your insurance company. In order to do that, you have to have a crime reference number. In order to have a crime reference number, you have to report it to the local police station. This is or was our local police station directly opposite the surgery. Ponders End police station. It's been pulled down now. But the first time I'd been in there was when I had to report something a few years ago, and it was a hard-edged place. You went in there, you had to go through double doors and press a buzzer, and some threatening-looking officers were there, and it was not very nice. Anyway, I tried to phone the police station, but they weren't answering, and a surgery full of people, and I decided that I was too anxious. I just had to go across and report it. So I go across to the police station, but it's completely different. The door's open, there's no buzzers. I go in there, there's a counter, and behind the counter were two people at a desk. There was an Indian guy, Asian guy, and a woman who looked like she had Chinese ancestry, sitting at the back, and they were talking to each other against a computer terminal. And they looked up at me, and they indicated that there was someone else in front of me. So there's a guy in front of me. And he actually was one of my patients, and he'd been beaten up. At which point I formed a little queue behind him. He looked at me, he said, "Hello, Doc." He took his T-shirt off and showed me all the bruises. He said, "It weren't my fault, Doc." And I thought, yeah, right. Anyway, he reported what happened to him, and I was getting more anxious because I had a waiting room full of patients. But the two people behind the desk at the back, they were very, very, there was something about them that was very calming. And the guy who was, he actually was in a Metropolitan civilian jumper. And he came over to the desk and he had lovely brown eyes. He looked at me and I immediately felt calm. And he took my details down. He said, "Look, I'm really sorry, but the computer system's new and it's very slow." And I thought, oh God, you know, I hope this is over quickly. Then he took my details and he said, "What's your date of birth?" And I told him. And he said, "Well, you're a Leo like me." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Are you interested in this sort of thing?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a psychiatric nurse at Chase Farm Hospital. And I'm doing a degree in spirituality. I'm just doing this job here to make a bit of money on the side." So I said, "Oh, you'll love this story." I said, I actually heard a voice telling me that my car keys were going to get stolen. At which point he slapped his hand on the counter and said, "Well, you're meant to meet them." And I thought, what? And with that, he went over to his desk and he drew out these Indian medicine cards. He said, "I'm going to give you a reading. That's why you're here." And I thought, I've stumbled into the twilight zone. This is crazy. So he said, "Look, think of a question in your mind and select a card and I'll tell you what it says." So at the time I was writing some software and I thought, I hoped it was going to be successful. So in my mind, I asked, is this software going to be successful? I chose the card and he looked at it and then he looked it up in his book. He said, "The world is not yet ready for it." And I thought, no, obviously not. And he said, "I'll give you a crime reference number. Thank you." And I left. And as I left the police station, I had this really weird feeling that if I went back there, that he wouldn't actually be there. I felt that I'd stumbled into this weird place. What I forgot to mention was, as I went into the police station, the walls were festooned with these symbolism of different religious images. There were crosses, there were the Sikh symbol, there was the crescent moon, there was the Star of David, all these different religious symbols. And he festooned the wall with them because that's what he was interested in. And on the desk were a row of 3 little Buddhas. So I went back to the surgery and told my staff there, and they started whistling the Twilight Zone theme. Because by that time, there were a few things happening to me. And the next thing that happened to me was I was at a party. And first person I met at this party told me that they'd grown up in a haunted house. By which point I was thoroughly sick of all these odd coincidences that were happening to me. So I said to my wife, "Look, you talk to them. I'm going to go into the kitchen and get a drink." As I went into the kitchen and got the drink, I overheard my cousin Rose, and she was saying to someone, "I used to be a spiritual healer, but I had to give it up when the kids were born." At which point I said to her, "Rose, what's happening to me? I keep on coming across this." And she said, "Well, they obviously want to work with you." I said, "Who wants to work with me?" She said, "The spirits." I said, "What do you mean they want to work with me?" She said, "Well, when doctors and nurses die, if they can continue their work on Earth, they'll find someone who they can work with and they'll try and make contact." And I thought, yeah, right, okay. There are a few other things like this that happened, and it was really driving me nuts. This is my patient, Dave Godfrey. His wife worked with my wife. My wife's a doctor too, and his wife's a nurse. And Dave came into our room one day, and he's a very sensible guy. He's a ex-science teacher. He's also a sort of superannuated hippie. He's done his time in the sweat lodges. He does the drumming at Stonehenge when it's the solstice. And I told him what was happening to me, and he said, "What you want to do is to join a development circle." I said, "Well, what are they?" He said, "Well, they're run at spiritualist churches, and so if they help you get a handle on this." He said, if it doesn't, it can be quite disturbing. I said, "Now listen, look, I'm a non-practicing Jew and my wife's Hindu. People like us don't go into churches." And he said, "Well, if spirit wants to work with you, you'll be shown the way." Fine, okay, let's see what happens. That evening, my wife is looking in the Enfield Independent local paper, and she happens to see a little small ad for the Beacon of Light Spiritualist Church. This is the Beacon of Light Spiritualist Church. It's not far from my surgery. And she said, oh, Keith Hudson's giving a talk, a demonstration of clairvoyance at the Spiritualist Church. Isn't that the man you saw with Felicity's face? I mean, she'd heard me talk about it ad nauseum, but she'd never met Keith. I said, yeah. She said, well, we ought to go. I said, I don't fancy going to that. She said, no, we really should go. Think of what Dave said. You know, let's go and see what happens. Now, this is Keith Hudson. And so we went. I sat at the back of this little spiritualist church. I've never been to a spiritualist service before, and quite frankly, I felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't sure what to expect. Actually, interesting enough, although I've changed a lot, I mean, I'd lost my hair and, you know, I've gone grey and got older. Keith actually lost his hair quite early. So when I knew Keith at 19, he was 27 then. He didn't look much different from when he did at that age. I could recognise him, but he obviously didn't recognise me. I was unrecognisable from the person I had been as a teenager. So I sat at the back, and Keith went off at a fair clip. He gave a short, pithy message to everybody in the church. He came to me, and he actually said the very same thing he said when he first met me, but it was slightly different this time. He said, sir, you have a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know you know it, but you will very soon, and they're telling me you're going to be writing a book about it. And at the time, I thought, I bet he says that to everybody, but actually he hadn't. And in fact, I got to know him, and he doesn't. So he actually gave me the same message, which is quite interesting. So at the end of the service, the church president stood up and said, look, Mr. Hudson hasn't got a car. Can anyone drive him back to Walthamstow, where he lives? And I said, yeah, I'll give him I jumped up and said, yeah, I'll drive him back to Walthamstow, but he's got to come back to my house first for a cup of tea. At which point he jumped back a bit, because he was obviously plainly taken aback at that. You do get some strange people in spiritualist churches. But I realised he was a bit shocked. And I said, no, Keith, it's me, Ian Rubenstein. And he said, oh, the doctor, I was just talking about you the other day to a mutual friend. And he came back to my house, and we caught up after 27 years. He sat in my kitchen smoking as a chain smoker, as I discovered a lot of mediums are chain smokers, or were in those days anyway. And he said, look, as you can see that I'm very different from what I'm like now. He said, come, take me back, drop me off at the church in Walthamstow. I'll show you around. And I run the largest open development circle in North London. You can come along if you want. You don't have to be a spiritualist. In fact, he didn't call himself a spiritualist either. He called himself a seeker after truth. He said, to be honest, between you and me, spiritualists can be very small-minded. He said, just come along to the circle. And I dropped him off, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, you know what? I will do. It's a laugh. It's nice to re-establish contact with Keith. So one rainy evening in February, this would be February 2004, I joined my circle, run by Keith. So this is the circle. It's a picture of me in the circle. This is actually a screen grab taken from a documentary film I was in Channel 4, which they came to the Spiritualist Church and did a story about us there. So I'll tell you how we trained. Probably some of you have already trained in this, but it's quite interesting to see what they do. The first thing you do is open up. Opening up means opening up to communication with the spirit world. And how does one do that? I mean, I knew nothing about this. I found it all very confusing. It uses the concept of the chakras. The chakras are the Ayurvedic system, and they correspond roughly to the glandular system in the body, but it's a sort of esoteric anatomy. So the idea is that each gland in the body has got an associated psychic center, and they're the colors of the rainbow. You start off at the base of the spine, and you work up gradually. You imagine them opening up like petals of a flower opening up until you reach the top chakra, and then you imagine white light flooding down through them and coming out through the bottom and going into the earth, so that you're basically becoming a channel between heaven, but you're rooted in the earth. The idea is that you then expand in your mind's eye, your aura, and you're waiting to receive messages from spirit, but you're also protected from any unwanted spiritual forces. That's quite a pleasant thing to do. I had no problem doing that. A little bit weird doing with a bunch of people, especially as the first person I sat next to was a guy called Joe, who's a little guy, shaved head, covered in tattoos, and looked for all the world like a bit like Gollum. I remember sitting there feeling very uncomfortable, and he said, "Loosen up, Doc, we're not going to eat you." And I wondered if he was going to eat me, but still, I got to know him very well. He was a nice guy. So we'd open up, and then we do a guided meditation. Now, there's many different sorts of guided meditation. There's Zen meditation. There's all different sorts of meditation. Covers all sorts of things. But the way trainee spiritualist mediums do meditation is they call it going on a journey. So the idea of going on a journey is to practice using your mind's eye. So the idea would be that you use your imagination as a faculty. So it's not just, when we say it's imagination, it's fantasy. The idea is you're going to use your imagination. So you're going to use your senses of vision, hearing, maybe bodily sensations, touch, as a way of receiving messages from the spirit world via the chakras, principally the third eye chakra and the throat chakra. This is the seeing. You have your sort of third eye, and this is where you control speaking from spirit and hearing from spirit. They're the most important, but also the lower ones control your bodily sensations. They're also important, but most people are quite visual. So Keith would take us on a journey. He might take us along a forest path, and he'd describe the trees. Then suddenly he'd throw in some kids on a bicycle. And then when we woke up, he'd say, well, when we finished the meditation, well, what color was the bicycle? And this, that, and the other. He's trying to get us to sort of think back to what we'd seen. He was very fond of medieval banquets. He loved medieval days. We'd have to describe the colors of the costumes. We'd have to pay attention to it and then talk about it afterwards when we finished the meditation. And beautiful natural scenery. So yeah, when we'd done that, we'd open up our eyes. We'd all feel a bit relaxed. And then, he'd say, how was that? And we describe what we'd seen. It was quite interesting. Wasn't uncommon for people to agree with some of the images they'd seen. Not a very close correlation, but it was quite interesting sometimes when that happened. And then the next bit would be giving messages. So how do you give messages? How does this happen? And this left me stumped because it was like nothing I'd ever done before. So basically, what you have to be aware of is that first fleeting thought that comes into your head. I found this very difficult because any science discipline, particularly medicine, you disregard any fleeting thoughts. You just analyze things, use your conscious mind. You pay attention to what's around you and you analyze it. But no. You have to put the analysis to one side. Analysis would be useful later, but you had to hook onto that first fleeting thought. It's a bit like, imagine an angler sitting by a river and he casts his line in and he gets a little nibble. You have to feel a little nibble of a thought, then you have to run with it and see where it takes you. I found that very, very hard. But when you've got something that you think you might have, you mustn't be afraid to give it out. What do I mean by don't be afraid to give it out? Don't be afraid to speak up, say what you've seen, and don't be afraid of making a fool of yourself. Interestingly enough, some of the most ridiculous images you have in your head that you think no one will take are often the most important ones, because they're, you normally wouldn't come to that by analysis or working it out. It just pops into your head and you think, well, no one's ever going to take this, but actually it means something to someone. Now, the next question is, who's it for? We call this map reading in mediumship. How do you know who this message is for? Well, when we're in circle, we use a system devised by a medium called Michael Redwin. So the idea is that we'd all be sitting in a circle, and sometimes the circle was quite large. I mean, I've got 10 numbers written here, but actually we'd have up to 26 people. Now, the way it worked was Keith mentally in his head would pick someone to be number one, and then he'd work clockwise or anti-clockwise as he felt around the circle, and he'd give everyone a number. But he wouldn't tell us where he started and which direction he was going in. So all he had to know was the first person that he picked, number one, and then what direction he was going in. But he assured us that when we had a message, that if we had asked for it to be given to a number, so with the message, try and imagine a number in our heads as well. He assured us that our spirit guide, our individual spirit guides, would coordinate it with his spirit guide to make sure it got to the right person, which I thought was bonkers, stark raving bonkers. However, that's what we did. Now, actually, it's quite a clever way of doing it, because it's almost like double blind. I mean, okay, Keith knew where he started, knew which direction he was going on, but he wouldn't know. You couldn't point to someone and say, "Oh, you're number one," or "You're number two." He'd have to work it out. So really, no one knew what the number was for until he sat down at the end of the session. And what he would do is he'd ask us all to keep a log of our messages. And what we'd do is we'd write it down, and we all had these illuminated pens on notepads, and we would write down our message, we'd put a number by it, and then we call it out. So it was a bit like the old style stock exchange. There'd be everyone saying, "Oi, Keith, message for number 4. Oi, Keith, message for number 11. He said, "Oh, right, calm down, I'm writing it down. But at the end of the evening, when we finished giving messages, he'd then have a list of messages, which he'd then crack the code, so to speak, and go around each individual and see what messages they'd got, who'd given it, and talk about it. So the problem I had was, having got the message, how did I know what number to get? The first thing I tried was to imagine an old-fashioned film sequence running in my mind, because I'm quite visual. And the very first message I gave, I remember this, was number 4. And the message was number 4, and I saw this guy in my head, and I had the urge that whoever number 4 was, they needed to check the holiday arrangements. I didn't know what it was, but I called it out, wrote it down. And when Keith cracked the code, number 4 was a woman called Jenny. And she said, "Well, you're describing my Uncle George. He always comes through, but I don't know what the message is about." I thought, okay, well, it doesn't mean much. But the following week, she came back and she said, I suddenly realized that I'd booked a holiday on the internet. Now, in those days, the internet was new, and she'd actually made a mistake, and she hadn't booked the holiday. So she checked it. And in fact, she said, "Well, that message was very handy, because otherwise I'd have missed my holiday." Oh, well, that's interesting. Interestingly enough, as the weeks went by, I found that although the numbers changed, so Jenny was 4 that week, but she wasn't going to be 4 the next week or week after, I found that I had the uncanny ability to track various people. So invariably, I'd get a message for Jenny, even though her number had changed, maybe 3 or 4 weeks in a row. And then I'd go on to someone else next week. Not consistently, but it was more than I'd expect by chance. Another example was, another way of getting a number was, I imagined a whiteboard, because I got a bit bored with imagining a film. So I imagined that I'd see an image on a whiteboard, and to the top left-hand corner of that image would be a little number, and that would be the number of the person. So I remember that I saw this image. It was actually a miner, and it was a jokey cartoon, and he was pointing to a hole in the ground. And when that, I think it was for number 9, and that turned out to be Joe, the guy with the bald head and the tattoos. And he said, "Thanks, Doc. My patio just subsided into a hole in the ground this afternoon." I mean, I was quite frankly amazed by that. I didn't know where that came from. So I was getting intrigued. This seems to be working. Another way of giving messages was to do direct messages, where you actually look at someone and see what you can pick up. And I was sitting in a circle one day, and Roger, who was one of the guys in the circle, pointed at a woman who'd just come into the circle just that one evening. And he said, "I can see some light behind you." And I sort of perked up, because I thought I'd seen a cone of light behind this woman. And I nudged Mary, who was sitting next to me. I said, I can see some light too. She said, "Well, speak up." So I said to Keith, I think I can see some light behind her as well. And he said, "Well, what's the message?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, ask them," meaning ask the guides. So I sort of sat there thinking, and as I was thinking, I saw this image of a woman in a waterfall. I could tell that she was quite calm. And also she looked very much like the woman who was sitting in the circle. At the end of the circle, I went to this woman. I said, look, I've got some more for you. And I said, I've got this waterfall and I can see she's like you. And she said, thank you very much. She said, I can take that message. I said, what does it mean? She said, well, I'm a twin, and my twin sister has just died of cancer, and I was looking after her. And she's very much the person you described. I said, what's the waterfall about? And she said, well, she liked Aysgarth Falls, and it was the last place we took her to before she died. And she said, that's really helpful. And we never saw her again. I guess she got the message that she wanted. And I thought, this is very interesting, because she clearly took a lot of comfort from this. I just wondered if this could be sort of harnessed and used within my surgery, you know, when I'm dealing with bereaved patients. I don't know if you know who this is. This is the famous spirit guide, Silver Birch, Maurice Barbanel's spirit guide, famous within spiritualist literature. When you start dealing with mediumship and spiritualism, you end up coming against the guides. And I had a really hard time with spirit guides. I don't know why. I mean, if you're dealing with dead people, why can't they have guides hovering around you? I think it's because I didn't like the idea of someone who was always around me. You know, were they always around me, watching what I'm doing? Did they see me always in the toilet or in the shower? You know, that sort of thing. It's creeped me out a bit. But you have to, they're a useful concept. Apparently we've all got guides, spiritualists say, and you're meant to demand proof of your guide. You just don't accept them. So apparently we all have a monk. I didn't know this, but we had this other medium, confusingly also called Keith. So there's Keith Fisher, who gave me the message, Keith Hudson, who was training me, and another medium called Keith. Very confusing. We're in our circle one evening. He says, everyone's got a monk. And one of the girls says, Keith, I ain't got a monk, I've got a nun. Can I have a nun instead? No, you've got to have a monk. And there you see some closed-minded spiritualist people there. No, you've got to have a monk. Interesting enough, we'd done a meditation where I'd met my monk, but he didn't look like this. This is my monk. We were meditating one day, and I found myself in a sort of monastery with pale walls, sitting under a tree, a cypress tree, on a stone bench, and opposite me was this guy, and he said, hello, little brother. I said, who are you? He said, I'm your guide, Nestor. I said, is that your name? He said, you can call me Nestor. He said, I was a Nestorian monk in 9th century Syria, and I was the abbot, and you were the fussy administrator of the monastery, and we called you little brother. He said, in fact, that's why you've chose to be born into the 20th, into this time, 20th century, now the 21st century. He said, I said, why? He said, well, you'd have really liked the office equipment they have in the 20th century, especially computers. And that's why you're into computers. And that's why you like looking through office equipment catalogs, which is something I still do sometimes, found them fascinating for some reason. I thought this was just crazy. I mean, do you really decide to be born again just so you can play with cool office equipment? Anyway, so what's the proof of that? What proof did I have about this? And this is where I'm going to tell you a story. I went to a school in Tottenham, and I was the last of the grammar year. The school was in quite a rough area, but as a grammar school, it took kids from all over the borough. The year below me, it became a local comprehensive school for the local estate. It was quite a rough estate. So the kids below me were very, very rough. There were a lot of playground fights, and I didn't like being in the playground or anything like that. So what I did was I became a librarian, which meant I could stay indoors at playtime, break time. I could do my homework. I also had access to books. And at the same time was a prefect called Lyndon Lewington. And Lyndon Lewington was about 5 or 6 years older than me. He was in the sixth form. And he's quite an imposing guy. Like me, he was rather overweight. He wore glasses. And he used to twist my ear and call me idiot child when I got things wrong. So he left an impression on me. He left the following year, and I didn't see him until I was in the sixth form. And I had a Saturday job, and this is Muswell Hill Library. So I had a Saturday job at the local library system, Haringey Libraries, and that was my regular library. But one day, someone's mother-in-law got run over, and they transferred me to Wood Green Library, which is no longer there. It's now a modern building. That was the library I was in. And whilst I was in Wood Green Library, for that one day, I was now in the sixth form, and I'd been applying for medical school, and I bumped into Lyndon Lewington. He just finished a neurophysiology degree, and he asked me what I was doing. So I'm applying to go to medicine. I had chosen, my first choice was Manchester Medical School. My second choice was Cardiff. And he said, have you looked at Nottingham? And I said, well, I've looked at Nottingham, but I don't really fancy the prospectus. And he was quite hot on Nottingham. He said, no, it's a really good medical school. You should look at it. And he drove me home. And I remember getting out of his car. I remember him leaning over to the passenger's seat as I got out of the car and said, Ian, make sure you look at Nottingham. You really should go there. And he drove off. So I did look at Nottingham Medical School. And because I was, somewhat in awe of Lyndon, I respected him. I decided maybe I'll apply. It actually was my first choice. And I did go to Nottingham. And actually, that's where I met my wife. So it changed my life, really. Fast forward many years later, I'm now married and I've got my children, and we're at the local Bushel Park Library. And we're in the library and I'm choosing some books. I've got my boys with me and my wife. And at the counter is a rather portly man with grey hair, and he's got a younger wife and a young child with him. And I realised I was looking at Lyndon Lewington. And I nudged my wife. I said, that guy, that's Lyndon Lewington. She said, who's he? I said, he was the guy who told me to go to Nottingham. It's thanks to him that we got together. I got quite excited. I ran up to him and said, are you Lyndon Lewington? He said, yes. And he jumped back a bit. I said, I'm Ian Rubenstein. You used to twist my ear when I was at school and call me idiot child. You told me to go to Nottingham Medical School. Thank you. I did. And these are my wife and children. I owe it all to you. And he went white and said, my God, he said, after I told you to go to medical school, I went to medical school too. This is my wife. These are my children. This is my child. And actually, his wife worked at the same health centre that I worked at. We just looked at each other in astonishment. And the librarian looked at us and said, can you keep the noise down? I've never heard anything so stupid in all my life. So why am I telling you this? Because this is how my guide proved to me, or tried to prove to me, that he's real. I'm in the library choosing some books in 2004, and I'm about to go into Millets and buy some sunglasses. I've got a load of books on my arm, and I hear my guide in my head saying, Ian, put the books down, go and get your sunglasses and go into Boots. I said to myself, why am I going to Boots? He said, you've got a meeting. I said, I haven't got a meeting, and you're not real, you're me. He said, I want to prove to you that I'm real. So I thought, okay, I'm going to prove to myself this is nonsense. I put the books down, went into Minutes, got my sunglasses. I went into Boots in Enfield Town, and I walked into the door and thought, what am I doing here? And in front of me was Lyndon Lewington and his wife. And I looked at him, and he looked at me. I said, Lyndon. And he said, Ian. I said, what are you doing here? He said, I've come to get my prescription. What are you doing here? I said, I've come to meet you. He said, what do you mean, come to meet me? I said, my spirit guide told me you were going to be here. And I realised that his wife was looking at him quite fearfully. This crazy guide accosted him in Boots. I said, never mind, spun around on my heel, said, nice to meet you, Lyndon, and ran off. So, is that proof? I don't know, but it was certainly odd. Funnily enough, I met Lyndon many years later at a party. It turned out he was much more into this than I realised. He didn't talk about it. Okay, so that's how I got started. How do I use it? Okay, well, this is Lucy Chrysostom. This is her. She doesn't mind me using her name. I'd known Lucy for some years, and she came into my room, and this would be the 6th of December 2004. The date's important. She came into my room. She's normally a bright, bubbly lady in her 60s, and she was in tears. And she said, I'm so depressed, doctor. I'm so absolutely depressed. You've got to help me. So I took a history. I couldn't get anything out of her. She didn't know why she was depressed. And in desperation, I typed into my computer a prescription for an antidepressant called citalopram. And as I pulled it out of my printer, I felt a blow to the back of my head, like I did when the keys got stolen. And I heard a voice, like I did when the keys got stolen. It's only the second time I've heard it, never heard it again since. And the voice said, ask her about her father. And with that, I saw the misty outline of a man over her left shoulder. And I said, Lucy, tell me about your dad. And she stopped crying. And she said, he was killed on the 8th of December, 38 years ago. Do you think that's why I'm depressed? And I said, Linda, does he look like? And I described the man over her left shoulder. She said, yes, how do you know that? I said, Lucy, I think I could see him over your shoulder. At which point, I said it through gritted teeth. She looked at me, grabbed my arm and said, thank you, doctor. Don't know how much this means to me. And the story is that she's Irish, and she was in service in Manchester. She was a maid in Manchester in the 60s. She was coming back to Ireland to visit her dad, and it was at the start of the Troubles. And what happened was her father was speaking out against the IRA. And whilst there's no evidence that he was killed by the IRA, he was found shot and his body was in a drain, a ditch somewhere. And she'd always thought it was the IRA, but she had no evidence. She'd also felt that her father was around her, but whenever she mentioned this, because she was Irish Catholic, she was told, you're not meant to believe this. Well, I sort of confirmed for her that her father was around her. Also, she said, well, now I know why I'm depressed, because she'd forgotten it was the anniversary. I don't need your silly pills. And with that, she thanked me and left my room. I thought that my career was over. She went outside, spoke to my receptionist, Carol, and told her what I'd said. I thought that was it. That was the end of my career. 4 weeks later, she came back into my room. And I said, Lucy, what's the problem? She said, nothing. I said, well, why are you here then? So she sat down and sort of smiled and said, come to tell your story. She said, a couple of weeks after you gave me that message, I'm at my Irish social club, and there's this creepy geezer with a second sight. The second sight was what the Irish call psychic gifts. And he said, Lucy, I've got a message for you. Come into this room. I don't want to tell you in public. And she said, he was creepy. He was tugging at my coattails. I said to him, if you've got a message, tell me right now here in the hall. He said, Lucy, do you know there's a man over your left shoulder? I think he's your father. And she said, of course I do. My doctor told me that 2 weeks ago. And she said, you know what, doc, that sure took the wind out of his sails. And she come to tell me that basically the message I gave her had confirmed it. I didn't know what to make of that. I still wasn't convinced, and she was surprised that I wasn't convinced, because I'm fighting this. My heart wants to believe, but my head's always critical of these things because of my medical training. But she found it very helpful, really, really helpful. It actually transformed her life. I actually had an article about me in Fate and Fortune magazine. Had a patient called Brian Beckinsale. If you know the name Beckinsale, he actually was related to the reactor Richard Beckinsale, but quite distantly. Now, Brian went into hospital to have a little operation on his tongue, and unfortunately died on the operating table. He bled to death because what no one realized was he had leukemia. And they hadn't actually looked at the blood test before they did the operation. He was a big guy, and I knew him very well. And his wife, Linda, came to see me, completely distraught, obviously. And whilst I'm speaking to her, I've got the strong sensation that Brian's in the room with her. I couldn't see him, but it was like he was actually situated where my filing cabinet was. It's a bit like when imagine you're in a room with somebody and you can't see them because you've got your eyes closed, but they're there. Not only that, he was trying to get my attention. And I found myself saying, Linda, I think I've got Brian here. And she stopped crying and she said, what's he saying? And then he began to tell me all sorts of things, mainly to do with the contents of his shed. In particular, he was adamant that she had to clean. She got a little pond in the garden, and he wanted to clean the float in it. And he gave me detailed instructions about how to get the white plastic float in this pump or something. Which she took it down. Yeah. And over the course of a year, every time Linda came to see me, he'd pop in and he'd give her instruction on things to do. It was quite remarkable. I was giving Linda acupuncture once. I do acupuncture, and she had a bit of back trouble. And as I was putting the needles in one day, Brian said, "Tell her about the Scottish relatives." I said, "Oh, Brian's telling me about the relatives from Scotland." She said, "Oh, she said, yes, on last Saturday, his relatives from Scotland turned up uninvited, just to give their respects. They were in London." She was actually found it really helpful and was so impressed that she wrote to Fate and Fortune magazine. She asked me if I might. I said, "I don't mind." And that's how I ended up in there. This is Paul and his wife, Sue. Paul Dyer. Unfortunately, Paul died. He was a heavy smoker, and he died of lung cancer. And when Sue came into my room, she asked me, because by this time word had got round that I was doing this sort of thing. And interestingly enough, my patient believed it more than I did. She said, "What are you picking up?" And I said, "Well, actually, yeah, I've got Paul here, and he's actually showing me he's in a rowing boat in a sort of lagoon with islands in it, and he's sort of rowing around these islands." And she smiled and said, "That's exactly what he wanted to do. He never got the chance to do it in life." And there was a few other things. She was quite impressed. She really felt that Paul was there. She said, "Would you mind speaking to Paul's son, her stepson?" And he was having a hard time coping with his dad's death. So this is Paul's son, Danny. And Danny came into my room. And as he came into my room, and I tuned in, I saw what I thought were the sort of trays you see at airports, but they were sort of whizzing around on conveyor belts in this large open area. I described this thing with things being whizzed in different coloured boxes, and Danny said, "Yeah, that's absolutely." He said, I said, "What is it?" He said, "I work at the Ocado Centre in Hemel Hempstead. It's a sort of in those days, it was semi-robotized packing centre." And Dad had never seen it. He wanted to see it. And I guess what he's telling me is that he's actually now seen it, because he's describing where I worked. After that, they Facebooked me, and he found it really helped. And his wife Arga said he was really struggling, and it really helped him. So that was very therapeutic. I was beginning to see how powerful this could be in cases of bereavement. Just before lockdown, Caroline came into my room. She was having a hard time. Her mother had died, and she was having a hard time coping. And I was getting some messages through from her mother. And then when lockdown happened, she emailed me and she said, "Oh, it's such a shame that you can't give me messages because we're not meeting face to face. I've been sent home because of my age, and I work from home remotely." But that time, the circle I was in, I've been to a number of circles now, because we're now fast forwarding just a few years ago, had gone to Zoom as well. And quite interesting enough, I found actually you can give these readings over video. I was quite skeptical before that, but it actually was working quite well. So I said to her, "Look, we can try it over Zoom." She said, "Okay, that's fine." So we did. And the interesting thing about Zoom is if you give a message about something, the person, because they're in their own home, they can find things for you. So I gave her a sort of reading over Zoom, and the first thing I saw was a sort of curved path with sand over it. And she said, yes, her and her sister are artists. Her sister had painted this picture and given it to her mother. And this picture was on her wall. She showed me the picture. Oh, it's okay. So it looks like I'm picking up something there. And then I saw a handbag. She didn't know what to make of it. I said, "Well, your mum's telling me about a handbag." She said, "Well, I'm going through mum's things and she has got a handbag." I said, "No, I don't think it's that." And then I saw what I thought was a charm necklace. I didn't even know what a charm necklace was. It was a bit like a charm bracelet, but with some large charms on it. I said, "Is there such a thing?" She said, "Yeah, mum's got one." I said, "Well, she wants you to get it out." And because we're on Zoom, and because she had her mum's things there, she could get hold of it. So in front of me, she's got the charm necklace, and I said, "Well, what's on it?" And she said, "There's a little handbag on it." So I said, "Well, I think she wants you to open it." So I said, "Does it open?" She said, "Yeah, it opens." So she opened it up. I said, "What's in it?" She said, "Well, there's a little silver plaque in it." She opened it up and she burst into tears. I said, "What's it saying?" She says, "It says, 'I love you' on it." And I have to admit, I burst into tears as well. That was such a touching message, presumably from her mum, she felt. And actually, I mean, over the subsequent to that, I got a lot more stuff about her family. It was really quite interesting. So she's of the firm conviction that I've actually managed to bring through quite a few members of the family. This is Victor. Vic Nichols, another one of my patients. Vic had a cough, and Vic's cough didn't get better. Vic was coughing and coughing and coughing for about a year. He'd seen all of my partners, and they had done all sorts of tests on him. He had MRI, CT scans of his chest. He'd seen specialists, and I was seeing him to get the result of his CT scan, which is going to be normal, and it was going to be quite disappointing because he was hoping that he'd find something to cure his cough. So when I gave him the result, he put his head in his hand. He said, "Well, I can't live like this." Because the minute I start talking, he started coughing. And then I thought, well, we've excluded anything physical. Maybe there's a psychological cause for this. So I said to him, "Vic, did anything happen round about the time that your cough started?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I lost my brother-in-law, Kenny, was my best mate. And I knew that Vic was interested in spiritualism because he talked to me before about this." I said, "Do you want to see if I can pick anything up about him?" He said, "Well, yeah, tell me what you've got." So I said, "Okay, let's see what I pick up." And as I spoke to him, I saw a row of little whiskey miniature bottles. And he said, yeah, he used to collect these. So I knew I was on the right track. And then I saw him sitting in a pub, drinking with him. He said, yeah, we used to go to pubs together. And then I was taken to a workshop. Now, I didn't know anything about his brother-in-law, Ken. I saw this workshop with all these little specialist tools. And I couldn't work out what they were. I'd never seen such things. They looked like what you call in medicine curettes, like sharp spoons. And he said he's a specialist engineer. He made little, he called them spoons for taking out hearts for heart transplants. And he said they were made individually. He said he had to take a baby's heart out once. He had to make a special spoon for this. So he made these things. And I saw lots of technical manuals. I knew that Ken didn't read books, but he read a lot of technical manuals. So we were on the right track. Then I saw a green field with lots of flags in it. And I couldn't work out what the hell that was. And Vic started laughing. And he said, I'm going to tell you this, but it's a bit naughty. I said, well, what is it? He said, well, Ken wanted his ashes scattered on the golf course where he played, but they wouldn't let us. So I walked along it and scattered his ashes there. And what I described was like a ditch that was at one end of the golf course. He was absolutely convinced that this was real. And he left my room and said, thank you. And then the next time I saw him about a month later, I said, how are you? He said, my cough's completely better now. I've got better. And he said, this was obviously something on my chest and the message you gave me really helped. Now, I don't know whether he was really in contact. I was in contact with Ken, but plainly he found talking about this and going through the procedure very helpful. And again, I've realized just how powerful engaging in this sort of discussion is with people. And this is him with Ken before he died. So that the last two cases, Victor and Caroline, they were so impressed with how it helped them. They actually came on to a talk I gave to the Enfield Over 50s Forum. And they were in the audience and sort of talked about how it helped them. So this stuff's really, really powerful. Okay, so we started off with the full card, Spirit in Search of Experience, start of the spiritual journey. And we end up with the last card, the world, the end of the cycle of life, the showing of what we've learned. And I have written a book about my experiences. It's available on Amazon. And I hope you've enjoyed my tale. And that's it.
Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating, Ian. Absolutely amazing. It's I have heard of people in the medical profession. My wife was a nurse for 35 years who are in tune with it, but they keep it very, very subsumed. It's not something that they talk about.
Yeah.
Some of them because they work in places where there are cultural sensitivities and you can't say it. And certainly she worked in oncology for a long time. And one of the consultants there had very strong feelings, and he just had to button it up. He couldn't say stuff because
I mean, I understand why, but
yeah.
I couldn't keep it. So I mean, it is like, I call it professional ice skating, as in skating on thin ice professionally. Because I mean, you can imagine, it just takes one complaint. In fact, I did have a complaint. So a woman came into my room, and she had a sore knee. So I examined her knee, gave her some Voltarol gel. She left the room. She promptly made a complaint to my practice manager. And the complaint was that her father-in-law died 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Rubenstein hadn't given her a message. And that actually was quite important, because what I realized was, and I hadn't realized this up to then, is that doctors and patients see things differently. I'm a scientifically educated guy. Most of my patients, they're not stupid, but they're not as educated in science. If they are, it's often not science, and they think in an entirely different way. Once I twigged that actually I was speaking to patients, but they really were talking different languages. Once I realized that they wanted a narrative, a story, they wanted to be heard, they wanted to talk about these things, we were off to the races. And my professional life, far from going down the tubes, became much more fulfilling. So instead of it being a sort of midlife crisis where I decided to jack it in, I got really much more into this sort of narrative style of medicine.
Do you feel that being a GP helps because you have a longer relationship, generally speaking, with the patients?
But when I was doing the working with the Transforming Cancer Services team, people heard that I had this book out, and I was working with professors. I remember this professor of kidney disease in children. I think she was at UCLH. We were at an office party one day. She sat next to me, and she said, "Sit down next to me and tell me about the experiences. I'm really interested." And I realized that a lot of doctors, as you said, they're very interested, but they don't want to talk about it. Nurses are more open to it. And they have more experiences, because I think they're with patients more, and it's more acceptable for them to believe it. And I know it's difficult for doctors, but I just really want to speak it out. I mean, the other guy who's done this, of course, is Eben Alexander. And I remember being a bit miffed that he got onto the first page of the front page of Time magazine, and I was in Fate and Fortune magazine. But there you go, I'm poor man's Eben Alexander. But he had to die, didn't he? And then come back. And thank God that hasn't happened to me.
There you go. There's time. There's time. Well, I mean, fascinating. There's been quite a few questions, quite a few observations coming through. So if I throw them to Caroline, if you want to do the questions, my dear, and we'll go on and see what people have to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stu. Ian, thank you so much for a very engaging talk. Probably like most of us in the paranormal field, we've all started off looking into different things that we can connect with. I myself started my journey very early with spiritualism, so I absolutely know where you're coming from, and it was so interesting to hear that there's a scientific background and you still have that openness. So thank you so much for your talk. I would love to chat to you more about this another time and get you back for another talk. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just going to run through the questions. So the first one, Robert Stenton did mention to do with the tarot card. He said the absolute spirit always sits high and on edge. I guess that's meaning that the ultimate spirit here would probably be your spirit guide. I think that's what he was commenting on.
I don't know. You have to ask him that. But I mean, the concept of spirit guides is very important. Now, whether they're real or not, I mean, it's really, really, I think if I still rack my brains. I accept it. The way I take it is it's like a hypothesis. It's a bit like quantum physics. No one knows how it works. Whether or not it's the real description of reality is very useful. So I'm happy to work within the spiritualist framework. It's not I'm sure there's more to it than that. Certainly, whatever's coming through to me, it thinks it's separate from me. Whether or not it is, I don't know. It might be part of me. Maybe it's a bit like I'm Word running on a computer and it's Excel, and they both think they're separate. We're all running on the same hardware. I don't know. Maybe it's a part of my unconscious mind that's come through. I don't know. Maybe it is a spirit guide. I don't know. But I mean, I'm prepared to accept it. I mean, I've had a lot more experience with spirit guides than this. I mean, I don't have time to go through all of them. Some of them have been absolutely astonishing. I mean, that was quite an involved one. But I mean, I have had other experiences that when I hear myself telling it, I think this has got to be real. The problem is when I hear myself speaking or people, I think, yeah, this is real, it happened. And then when I'm sort of lying in bed and I'm thinking, is it real? I can't believe it, but it still happened. Sometimes I have to reread my book to think, yeah, this actually happened. And I actually kept notes. I was so confused by this that I actually kept notes. I don't normally keep a diary, but because we were writing down our messages, you know, in the circle, I had a book of messages, and I then transferred it onto Word, and eventually I had this sort of Word file. Funnily enough, every time we had a visiting medium, they'd sit next to me and say, "Oh, you're going to be writing a book one day." And then one evening, this medium came to our circle and sat next to me and said, "They're telling me you're going to be writing a book very soon." And I thought, there's no way, I'm too busy. And the next day, I was cycling along and I fell off my bike and broke my knee. And I was sitting at home feeling sorry for myself. And I suddenly realized that I'd had this message that I was going to write a book. I was bored. And I thought, well, I better get cracking in case they send boys round to break the other knee. So that's how I ended up writing my book. And I did it in 6 weeks, actually. How I got it published was another thing, because it wasn't self-published, and that was a journey in itself. I basically couldn't get it published in the UK. I was just about to get it to hit self-publish on Amazon Create Space, and I thought there's an awful lot of people on the other side of the Atlantic who speak English, and I wrote, the first email I sent was to Anomalous Books, and they said, well, we don't publish, you know, 98% of manuscripts we reject. And then 2 days later I got an email saying, it's smart, witty, we love your British sense of humor, but you're gonna have to rewrite it in American English. So the book's about an English doctor with English patients, but written in American English for Americans. It's very strange.
Yeah, I loved listening to you talk through that then. So you were saying, you know, I don't know if I believe that that guides are real. I think they're real. And then you can see your scientific brain kicking in then and telling you, you know, you've got to think about this scientifically. It's great. I think everybody's probably on that same page as me, watching you try and work this out in your own head. Do you know what? I don't think you ever will. Because who's got the answers? Who knows the real?
I've formulated Rubenstein's first law of the paranormal, and it starts from this. Well, I thought I was heading towards becoming a healer at first, and there was in Pulse, there was an article by a doctor who'd taken up healing, so I phoned him up, and I spoke to. I can still remember the conversation. He was whispering, and I said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm in my flat in Wimpole Street." I said, "Why are you whispering?" He said, "Because I've got an alien in my flat. He's living in the cupboard. He's very shy. I don't want to disturb him." And I thought, is this how it ends? Living in a flat on your own in Wimpole Street with an alien in your cupboard? I mean, I thought this is bonkers. But so Rubenstein's first law of paranormal is it always ends with aliens, because of course what we all know now is that you get into one arm of the paranormal, you end up with another, and the sink is actually dealing with aliens, alien spirit guides or seeing UFOs. Basically, what I'm saying with my first law of paranormal is it's all linked. It's all to do with consciousness. I didn't realize that at the time, but there we go. Ask away. Absolutely. Ask away.
Absolutely. I love hearing that as well, that you had to break your knee just to find some time with to get a book done. I'm currently sat here with crutches with my meniscus and my medial lateral ligament gone, and I'm getting time to write. So, you know, we're on this
there you go.
Correlation. But
nothing happens by coincidence, eh, Caroline?
No, you sent them around to me, Ian, didn't you?
Yeah, no, hopefully not.
Well, if it's any coincidence, I've actually got 2 broken fingers, but it's just stopping me typing. I'm stopping myself typing. That's
this is turning into a surgery, guys.
I know. Well, you're a GP, mate. Well, when you finish, but I have got. Oh, no, we won't go there. Anyway, Caroline, go for it.
But we will finish this tonight by coming back to Stu, because he is one of our alien representatives, so that we can make sure that the full circle is finished and you do finish on an alien again.
Can I just say, I would have expected to be abducted by aliens, because the thing I'm really into is UFOs, and have been since the age of 6. There's one thing I do believe that UFOs are real. I would have expected for one to land and then abduct me, and I'd be talking about that. I did not expect the ending up training as a medium and using it. I just didn't expect that. I didn't sign up for it. Maybe I did, but there we go. So carry on.
As for the healing thing that you were talking about, you can still be a healer without actually having to put hands on, though, can't you? So maybe when your patients come, you give them, would you call it absent healing?
Yeah, I mean, I have a healing guide. She says she's Angelique. She shows herself as a medieval nun. She's got the backstory is that she was so she tells me in my fantasy, she was a noblewoman who had the gift, and in order to protect her, she became an abbotess of a convent, and she'd do healing there undercover. And she says that she works with me. It's great, isn't it? It's lovely. Who knows?
Well, in your fantasy, you've got a nun. In my fantasy, I've got a doctor called Michael. So we'll go along with it. Don't worry. Right. But there is a lot of apologies from our side, because Stu didn't even know that he was going to be doing this evening. So he rang me last minute, and I thought I was going to be on leave this week. So unfortunately, apologies from the deepest, darkest parts of my heart. I do have one. I didn't press record very quickly, so we've missed the very beginning of your talk, but only a few minutes was missed. So I apologise for that. Right, the next comment we've got is from Stu himself. Oh, crikey, my screen keeps moving around.
Well, I've got it if you like.
Stu said the blue light from the Indian apparition in the dinner party dream is fascinating. Doesn't blue light feature in astral projection and claims of invisibility? I've not heard that, Stu. I've heard that blue's healing.
Yeah, blue's healing. I mean, in spiritual terms, blue or green sometimes, but is a healing color. And I think that's what that came from. I think the implication was that I'd been giving out energy all along, and that's. I mean, maybe that's why. I don't know. But I mean, as my cousin Rose said, you know, they if this is real, then they'll want to work with people. Why me? I don't. Actually, I possibly do know why me. I had a near-death experience at the age of 9. Can I talk about this briefly? Have you got time?
Yeah, of course you can.
So as a child, I used to feign sore throats to get out of school. And my mum, being my mum, would tuck me up in bed and give me a bowl of Heinz tomato soup and a soft buttered roll. So when you're 9, why wouldn't you? And I feigned myself into actually having a tonsillectomy, because in those days, recurrent sore throat meant take the tonsils out. So I had my tonsils out. And this was at the North Middlesex Hospital in Enfield, it's Tottenham. And it was on the same ward that if you're on enough, Emergency Ward 10 used to be filmed on. Don't know if you remember that. And the cast of Emergency Ward 10 visited and gave us all gifts. So that's how long it was. It'd be in 1964. And I had a post-operative hemorrhage. I remember vomiting up blood, and I lost a lot of blood. I wasn't going to die, obviously not, but I was quite ill. It took a while to get me prepped for theatre the next day. And when I went under the anaesthetic, and I have this still it's very vivid in my mind, I found myself in what I would only describe as a large black polytunnel. And I was standing up at one end. It was like a ribbed black tunnel. And it was gently curving off to the distance towards the left. And from my abdomen was this large molten, it looked like a very thick umbilical cord, but made of taffy or molten glass. It was being extruded out of my abdomen. It was on a long thing going down this tunnel. And on the end of it was a very bright, shiny light, like a star. And I remember thinking to myself, and I was only 9, so I didn't know what umbilical cords were or anything, but I remember knowing that I actually was that star, that my body wasn't me. I was that star on the end of that light. Woke up. So I didn't meet anybody or anything, but I think that fulfills some of the criteria of a near-death experience. I mean, I was quite ill. and what I didn't nearly die, didn't end up on the front cover of Time magazine, but they do say that people have near-death experiences, as I discovered after when I researched this, maybe come back with gifts. I don't know. Maybe that was why.
But I must admit that the reason I sort of mentioned the blue light thing, there was a book years ago by a guy called Steve Richards called Invisibility. There are people who've trained their eyes to start to see more into the ultraviolet, and they tend to then see people who are astrally projecting, but they also tend to see people who are ill, and they have a different shade of blue.
Yeah.
And so it's like the subtle body reflects the physical body, but actually gives a better, it's auras effectively, isn't it? But blues are very much the things that indicate it. And people, when they're astrally projecting, it's just a blue body, Dr. Manhattan style, wandering around. And I just wondered whether that's part of the same sort of thing.
I don't know. I've got to say, I did try seeing auras. I'm not very good at it, but I saw one. I was giving a fledgling night. I was up on platform many years ago, and I remember looking at someone. I could see this heat haze rising up from them, and I could see it rippling to the point where I could see something behind it rippling, like a notice board, and it went right up, really right up to the top of the high hall. And I remember saying, "What on earth's that?" And then Joe, the little guy with the bald head, looked like Gollum. He said, "Well, what you're seeing is you're starting to see auras. It looks like a heat haze at first, but I never developed that gift." Oh, there we go.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So I've got a comment by Paul Gledhill. I believe you know him. He said, "Hi everyone, stuck working this evening, so can only grab little bits of the talk. I've interviewed Ian before and he's an absolute delight." Yes, Paul, we can concur with that. He is an absolute delight, and we hope to get him back on again.
Yeah.
Kieran Farrell says, "I've been in sessions using this technique. It's pretty good and does build confidence that you can do it and get messages and map them. I used a similar system in front of me in ranks of people in the audience in spiritual church on some occasions when I was invited up to the platform. I moved on from this and used the image of the room in my mind, visualizing it." I think that's in relation to the numbering, wasn't it? That your colleague did.
They call it map reading in the game, and it's this is interesting because it's developed now. The SNU now they have a thing now where you basically I call it 20 questions, and you say, "I've got Bill here. Anybody got a Bill? Put your hands up." Right, and then if you've got Bill with red hair, some hands go down, and eventually you whittle it down. I mean that's the modern way of doing it. I was taught to give it directly. The problem with that is you could easily be wrong, and sometimes these links, which is the way you link into people, sometimes they reflect off different people, which is quite interesting. And you can see trainee mediums getting confused because they're linking into somebody else who then link into somebody else. It's a bit like cross wires on a telephone. I mean, plainly there's something going on, which is to do with communications technology. I mean, I think there is a science to it. I've got a theory that is to do with bandwidth as well. The old media, the old spiritualist, the medium was called an instrument. And it's a bit like those player pianos. So, you imagine that you put the roll of paper in the piano and it plays a tune. So what happens is the idea would be is that the communicating entity can only give out what the piano can play. So it will put images in your mind, which are recognizable to me. So I remember once I was giving a message and I saw an aunt of mine and I could describe her. And I said, "Well, I've got this aunt here, but it was plainly not for her." But as I described her, the recipient said, "You're describing my aunt." In other words, it was a way of getting the image into her mind, using the image that are in my mind. And I think what happens is that as the bandwidth gets more and more, they can get more and more original stuff in. But when it's quite weak, it's a bit like they can just point to various things. I mean, I can't make it any more than that. I mean, obviously, absolute terms, when you've got enormous high bandwidth, you're talking about physical mediumship, where you actually get manifestations. And I've got friends who I know who actually sat in the Skoll experimental group. And I don't know if you've heard, you probably know about that, but they were there when the mini UFO appeared. Yeah, they actually witnessed that, which is partial manifestation of kids. I actually had the good fortune because I gave a talk to the Scottish Society of Psychical Research, and Linda and Tom Anderson were working with the Skull Protocols in West Glasgow, and they invited me and my wife to sit in their group. It was a pitch black, enormous, rather dilapidated house in West Glasgow, huge. It was so dark you couldn't breathe, but unfortunately nothing happened when I was there. But I met a lot of people there who'd witnessed stuff. So I mean, I'd love to see that. I mean, I'm lucky to have seen Felicity's face. I really would like to see some other stuff, but who knows?
Yeah,
Any more questions?
it's fascinating.
I'm open to anything.
There's loads of questions here, absolutely loads. But do you also find that when you're trying to give your messages to somebody that you don't always reach the intended recipient, because the people in the audience are so desperate for that message because they're vulnerable and they're in a place that they need to have that comfort, that they're just grabbing onto straws and they take that message for someone else?
Yeah, so-called message grabbers. Yeah. You've got to be
I
careful.
remember I've only been to a medium recently in the last 10 years twice. I lost my husband, and my friends thought it would be comfort for me to drag me along so that I'd get a message. I didn't need it, but I went along, and the lady was describing my uncle to me and saying about us going to the beach in the freezing cold winter. He lived from your neck of the woods. He was he worked as a CEO in a London hospital. And when he came down to Weymouth, he loved the beach. And it doesn't matter if it was Christmas, he would have a Christmas swim. And she was telling me this, but this woman was still grabbing it. And then I got home and I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to take that message for me and let her have the comfort that was meant for her. And, it was a very strange experience having somebody else accept every single message that was given. And you thought, could two people in that room have that same connection and have all of those things align? I don't know.
What I was told by a medium called Paul Jacobs, and I sat in with him at a mediumship demonstration, an open day at Arthur Findlay. I thought he was really good. Although he took me aside because I tuned into this woman, this woman's aunt, and I burst into tears. And because she actually would burst into tears, I didn't know what was happening to me. He took me aside and said, "You got to control yourself." I mean, it was all new to me. I didn't know what the hell was going on. But he actually said the spirit was very, very clever, and they will put lots of different messages into one message as you get more experience, and you can unpack it. So, there's some very clever people on the other side, presumably.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Darren Hudson said, this may be a silly question. Do spirit guides guide you, even if you don't connect with them?
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole point. Well, spiritualists believe that you have your doorkeeper, which is the person that comes in when you're born and is there till the day you die, and that they're with you. So yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, presumably, if what's happened to me is to be taken at face value, they were with me long before I knew who they were. And certainly a lot of mediums don't know who the spirit guide is, or they make contact and then the spirit guide recedes. I mean, I don't have my spirit guide there with me, working with me all the time. I mean, they may be, but I'm not aware of them all the time. When I meditate, I can bring them forward and we can have a chat. I still can't believe it's real, but I mean, really, some of the stuff that's happened, you've got to think, God, there is absolutely something, there is a personality there with some of the things that have happened to me.
Strange connection again, talking about meditating. The lady, I think you said her name was Caroline. Yeah. She drew the painting of the beach. That is the exact view that I use when I meditate. That's my go-to calm, safe place. And it's strange. I just looked at it. I thought, oh, that's the picture that I use for mine. So I don't know if I've seen her picture somewhere else. No idea.
Interesting enough that she's from a family of artists. Her father was an artist, and she's an artist, and her sister's an artist. And the last message I gave her was, I saw these giraffes, like zoo animals, but in funny positions. And she just started laughing. I said, I don't know what I'm seeing. And she said, there's an artist who does giraffes in funny positions. And one of them will be two giraffes having a kiss with their necks, entwined around each other. She said, my father and I used to send us cards about these drugs. We swap them. She then emailed me a card, which is pretty much what I described. Yeah, so I see. There's some people you can pick up things for, and then some people it's very, very hard to pick up. I don't know why. I mean, I think it's whether you're simpatico with people, I guess.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Kaz Kelsall said, I had an article in that same magazine 4 years ago. Well, I guess that we're not anything till we make it, until we get into Fate and Fortune.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. Let your Gus forget. I mean, I was going to medical meetings and people were coming in with rolled copies of the British Medical Journal, and I unfurled my copy of Fate and Fortune magazine. By that time, word had got round there, and they thought I was pleasantly dotty. But I thought, that's quite a big, because I'm quite senior. You see, they're all these young guys. I mean, I'm from the generation where you were sort of hippies, weren't we? And we sort of a bit we tried to break the mold. But the younger lot, they have to be a lot more corporate. So they're all sitting there, sort of. Taking all the stuff they're being told from drug companies. I'm coming in talking about this stuff like some crazy guy.
You're a breath of fresh air. That's what you are. Roy says, what's your views on the work of Dewey Rees?
I don't know. Who's that?
I don't know. Roy, are you still here? Do you want to unmute yourself? I think he might have gone. Apologies. If he comes back in a bit later.
Caroline.
Oh, you are there. Roy,
yeah.
who is Dewey Rees? Do tell, please.
Yeah, he was a Welsh doctor who started researching afterlife, and he's written a book called Pointers to Eternity, and he got quite a big backlash when he started studying it. He studied widows, bereavements. He actually spoke to bishops, and he was getting quite a lot of backlash from the medical council. So he actually wrote this book, which I've just said, Pointers to Eternity. So, Ian, did you find you were getting a bit of a backlash when you first started coming out with your mediumship?
Not at all. No. It was like Keith said, don't be afraid to take a leap of faith off that cliff, they'll catch you. No, I mean, I used to, honestly, right, I would lie in bed at night thinking, what on earth am I doing? I mean, I'm in a busy job, it's serious stuff. It just takes one complaint and you've had it. But no, quite the reverse. And people are interested. Every year, doctors have to have an appraisal. And I was appraised by a well-known doctor and family therapist and psychotherapist and a GP called John Lorna. We had a long talk about this, how we could do it ethically. And I think because I don't come from it I come from it as in the spirit of open-minded inquiry. I don't have any fixed views. I'm very respectful of my patients' views. I don't know whether it's real or not. And I think that helps. I mean, if you say, look, this is real, I'm giving you messages from someone, you've got to believe it. You're forcing yourself on other people. But I'm not just don't do that sort of thing. And for me, it's like we're on this journey together. Let's explore this. It might be helpful. If you don't want to do it, it's no problem. But it might be worth exploring. And no, I didn't speak to bishops because because for me, it's not religious. I mean, it's obviously religion has sort of taken this on. I don't see it as a religious thing. I'm not naturally a religious person. For me, if this is real, it's real, and it has to fit into our scientific worldview. And yeah, there might be a God, but we're talking about an intelligent being, maybe the intelligence of the universe. I don't know. If you want to worship it, that's up to you. But I don't come from it from a system of worship. I suppose I come to it from a system of service. If it's useful, if it helps people. So it's very difficult. I mean, you're trading a fine line. Obviously, touch wood, so far I've managed to do it. In fact, I'm semi-retired now. I could walk. I'm 68. I do 3 surgeries a week, and I don't have to do that. And I do it because I enjoy it. So no, quite the reverse for me. It actually was a beneficial thing. It got me to let me put it like this. When you're a medical student, you learn how to make a physical diagnosis. When you're a hospital doctor, you learn how to make a physical, and you realize that psychology has something to say. You make a physical and a psychological diagnosis. It all feeds in. When you're a GP, you learn to make a physical, psychological, and a social diagnosis, the patient's social stage. You're aware of it. You work in the community. And then I got to the point where I guess I'm making, you might say, a spiritual diagnosis, not but it's like looking the search for meaning. So I guess I'm now working at that level. Yeah, I make a physical, I'm informed by the patient's physical, their psychological, their social condition, and also their search for meaning, how they view their life and how that fits into the wider universe. That's basically holistic medicine. It's not fashionable now. I mean, when I was a young doctor, it was all, we were all going to be holistic doctors, but quite the reverse. You just have to follow the algorithm, I mean, that's what it's like now.
Thank you. Just to touch on that briefly, I'm a sports therapist. My partner is a psychotherapist. And when we first met, in my training and his training, he was being told that the mind is affected by physical ailments in the body, or it affects the physical in the body, and vice versa. In my training, I'm constantly being told that if you've got that chronic pain, then start looking into the psychological side and see what can help. So we are being taught that the body and the mind is entwined as one. I just need to get myself somebody like you to work in our clinic as well, and we've got it all covered, haven't we?
Yeah, yeah. I used to I worked in the very first outpatient pain clinic at the Whittington Hospital in the mid 1980s. I used to do hypnosis, very powerful. In fact, I did it from school. If you read my book, you'll hear what happened with that. And they said, oh, when you go to medical school, actually, the reason I did it was because I saw this book in the library and it had this swooning woman, this man standing in a powerful position over her, smoking a cigarette. I thought, I'll have some of that, please. So I started practicing on my friends at school, and it worked. So, and actually, when I was doing gynecology at the hospital, we had a woman we couldn't get out of the ward because she had hysterectomy. We couldn't take the catheter out. She'd go into urinary retention, and the only thing that helped was hypnosis. So I started to work with hypnosis as a doctor, and I was doing hypnosis in the first years of general practice. But of course, it takes you're spending quite a bit of time with people doing that. So eventually, I stopped doing that because it's too time consuming. I then explored acupuncture. I like to keep these things open, really.
Thank you. I don't know what this was in relation to, but if we don't work it out, we'll ask Kieran. I know the paper, The Hallucination of Widowhood. If you looked at the paragraph just above the reference section, you will see that the paper was based on a thesis, which was at the time to be submitted to the University of London. Dr. Pinsent, who is credited in this paragraph, taught me maths in my first year of my joint honours degree in chemistry and physics, and studied as an undergraduate in London. Kieran, can you help with this?
Well, yes. I mean, it's just one of those sort of coincidences, or is it synchronicity? I don't know. So it's literally just a connection, because I remember Dr. Pinsent talking about this and talking about that paper in some of his classes, and sort of saying to us as young science students, look, there's something to this stuff. Don't think that, science is all maths and maths is all logic, and there's nothing more to life, the universe and everything than simply what I'm going to teach you through the maths classes. Dr. Pinsent was a brilliant mathematician, and he could solve complex equations very quickly. But he was also the kind of mathematician that couldn't balance his checkbook back in those days when we had them. So it was just a memory more than anything else. Curio.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Sheena Aspinall said, I've heard only good things about you, Ian. It's been truly fascinating hearing your journey.
Thank you.
Sadly, in this field, far too many regard themselves as mediums. I've personally only met two genuine ones, one being my previous doctor and a wonderful lady 15 years ago who was exceptional. Thank you for your talk. However, I must go, so we can't get Sheena to converse with you, unfortunately. And then we got lots and lots of thank yous. Thank you, Ian. Fascinating talk, brilliant. Karen Hamilton-Viles said, I wish you were my GP, thank you. Really interesting. Enjoyed your book. I like the honesty of your journey.
Oh, thank you.
Right. What's Jackie saying? I once heard the ghost of a client next to me in a car. I know this story. She told me before. Not knowing they were dead. And I've told this, she says, I've told this story before. but had a big debate with my manager whether I should tell the family or not, but decided best not to. Yeah, I think Jackie was a mental health nurse, so yeah, you were saying that
I'm a
the
mental health social worker, but
okay.
it was it was a big sort of thing with my manager whether we should, and she, you know, again, it was, I think if I'd known, been able to like yourself, sort of suss them out to see whether they'd be receptive, it might have been okay, but we thought it might not go with their belief system, so we decided it was one of these that I didn't know the client was dead. Heard it beside me. We then had all these evidence after I got into work. The client had died just before I just literally walked under the ward where she died, and I mean, nobody believed that it wasn't a ghost. We all completely believed it was a ghost. You know, it was, you know, literally exactly right. But so it was quite good to believed by my colleagues. But it was, you know, do we tell the family or not? Would it have been helpful? And in a way, I think it would have been, but you just don't know. They might have reacted really badly, and
it's a difficult judgment, Jackie, and you know you've got to go with your intuition. If your intuition is don't, you know, then don't. Yeah,
that's it. You just don't know what to do. And another comment I've just put as well. I had a colleague, actually, it was a spiritualist, but also a bereavement counsellor, and she was very conflicted because sometimes she'd be talking to somebody and see somebody, the husband or the dead wife, standing next to them. And she said she, you know, her decision was to not tell them because in terms of her work and a theory about bereavement, she felt that conflicted with the grief process. But she was very conflicted, a bit of a wanted to, but her decision in the end was not to. But she said she felt some people it might have helped them, but I mean, a very difficult one.
It is. I mean, I really, I mean, Caroline, she was in such a state, and she's, you know, she found what I did much helpful. For some people who get stuck, it's good, but it's very difficult to judge. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I give it up to whoever's guiding me and let them decide. It seems to work.
Great. Yeah, but thank you for some wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay, here's a question I'm going to follow on from Kaz Kelsall. She says, nurses see the soul leave the body. Ian, as a doctor, you must have been with people and when they've passed. Have you seen a soul leave the body?
The only person I was with who passed was my dad. No, doctors, this is the whole thing about Shipman, wasn't it? He would be there when they pass, but doctors tend not to be there. We're not. The nurses are, but we don't. The nurses are with the patient. I've been with patients a couple of times, maybe in arrest times, and you're too busy. No. When my dad passed, it was very peaceful, but I didn't actually see anything. I had an experience when my father-in-law was unwell, and he was about to die. And I just had this vision of us by the bed saying goodbye to him. But on the other side, there were people waiting for him to sort of be reborn to the spirit world. But I wouldn't say I saw it. It was maybe it's just a comforting fantasy, but no, I haven't.
Thank you. John Kane says, Ian, I've met you personally when you were working with Mark Warwick.
Oh, right.
Warwick.
Yeah. Yes, right, yes. It's a while.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you remember John?
I don't remember. Sorry, John, I don't remember, but Mark was a patient of mine. And so when I was off on my journey, I went all over the place. But actually, what I should have done was put a sign up in my waiting room saying, doctor wants to explore spiritual experience with his patients. Because Mark, he's a bit like me. He's a podiatrist. I think he's retired now, and a hypnotherapist. And he ran a ghost hunting team. We were the one and only ghost hunting team. We were allowed into the Salt Tower, the Tower of London, wow. which he plastered with cameras and everything. And we spoke to the chief beefeater there who had an experience. Unfortunately, I've lost. I mean, I'm still a Facebook friend, but I haven't seen him for ages. And actually, as I discovered, I'd actually find ghost hunting quite boring because you're up all night waiting for not much to happen. And actually, what I'm really interested in is developing my mediumship, which is quite scary. Going up on platform and putting yourself out there is really scary. I can see Kieran's nodding furiously there. Yeah.
But it is. Oh, he's here.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Hi, Ian.
Hello, John. Oh, John. Yes, I remember you, the UFO guy.
That's me. That's
Yeah,
me.
I've got your card. I remember. Yes, UFO. Yes, yes, yes. I remember you now. It was your voice. Yeah.
Nice to see you. Great
Yeah,
talk.
good to hear from you. I can't see you. Good to hear from you. Have you found any UFOs? Are you still looking?
Still looking. Still looking.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, John. John's also said he's got your book, so I'm guessing that he's probably enjoyed that when he's read it. Darren Hudson said, fascinating to hear from someone who comes from a scientific background with the combination of spiritualism. It seems to mostly be that it's either one or the other, but not both. A great enlightening talk, very profound. Many thanks.
I'm not the first doctor who got into this. If you look at the history of spiritualism, there's a lot of doctors who've been involved with it. I mean, I thought I was breaking new ground. Well, for me it was. But look, the thing about Keith Hudson, he had a lot of classic spiritualist textbooks. He collected books. And when you read it, actually, I met Maurice Grosse. I went to his house just before he died. And he looked at me, he said, this has all been done by the Victorians. He said, they proved it. All we're doing is going over the same old ground. And he's right. I mean, there were doctors involved in this before. It's just unfortunate but we've forgotten the history of it. And we don't take the observations that were done by Edwardians and Victorians seriously. I don't know why. Some of them were really clever people. Oliver Lodge, William Crookes, people like that.
I think being a doctor makes you really a credible witness, so that people think that you're educated, you're somebody who's honest and has this background, and because of that makes you credible. So yeah, it's probably landed on the right person to work with the public. Some of the people from the Victorian times, back in the when they were doing their platforms back then, may not have been respected because they might not have had such a credible position in society.
They had proper science. I mean, very famous scientists, Sir William Crookes, Oliver Lodge, some physicians. There's a guy called Trevor Roper who wrote an undergraduate book on ophthalmology, and we all read it as students. What we didn't realize was that he actually was sitting in a circle for 30 years in Wimpole Street, which was the where the spirit of, now what was his name? There's a father and a son spirit. He was the deceased spirit of I can see Kieran remembers it, of an ophthalmologist consultant. And for 30 years, he instructed these consultants on techniques from the other side. So this has been going on for ages. What annoys me is that people haven't actually come out and done it. I mean, because if they'd have said this, if I'd have heard about this as an undergraduate, it would have saved me an awful lot of soul searching, because you say, yeah, this is real. So it would be nice. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is trying to come out and tell people, look, this is worth exploring. I think all I've got to offer really is just saying, look, I'm very upfront about it. I wish people had been a bit more upfront. I can understand why not. But I don't know. It's and of course I'm getting on now, so I'm not sure the next generation of doctors are going to be interested or have the time, quite frankly.
On the subject of time, can I just say I'm aware of the time. It's 5 to 9. We do tend to wrap up by about 9 p.m. So maybe we've got time for a couple more questions, Caroline.
Yeah, we've got a couple more we can ask. Ian, Jenny Caldwell says, how do you often receive your messages, and are you able to switch off?
Now I can do it. So now, how can I put it? I don't know if any of you started studying martial arts. I did karate. I was terrible. My martial arts name wasn't Bruce Lee, it was Bruised Knee. And when you do karate, you have to do certain forms in sequence. And then after a while, you then loosen up and you do what's called sparring, kumite, which I was never very good at. I could never actually work out why I was doing these bloody sequences. And then it all went to how you just did it loosely. And what I've learned as I've got older and wiser is that you start off doing things slowly and in sequence, a bit like learning to drive, I suppose, and then it all happens automatically. So when I first started, I would find it hard to open up. But once I'd opened up, I couldn't switch off. I call it the stuck gate. It's either open or closed. And it was very difficult. I didn't want to switch off. I mean, there's a thing called the space cadet phase. And this is Rubenstein's second law of paranormal, is that everybody becomes a space cadet at first. Most people recover, not all of them. So it's like, come in, planet Earth, Ian, planet Earth's calling you. So, I was all this weird stuff was happening. I was going, well, amazing. And I couldn't turn off. And I was just picking up stuff all over the place. I found it interesting, but obviously you can't sustain that. And then it was shut off, and then I get nothing. I feel like I was cut off. Now, it just, when I'm in my circle, I can do it. When I want to do it, it happens. It's not always successful, but it's just automatic. So how I do it, I just open up. And it's just, if I want to do it, I will very quickly go through the chakras, but it's like in an instant. I just use that when I can't do it. It's like a muscle, you just learn how to do it. I can't describe it really. It's a bit like if you think about walking, you suddenly find you can't walk.
Definitely. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So, Gladys, you're unmuted, I see. Do you want to go ahead?
If that's all right, Caroline, thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Evening, Ruby. How are you?
I'm all right.
Good, man. Something I wanted to ask you before, but now's an ideal opportunity. I could imagine that there are certain times of the year, for instance, birthdays and Christmas and stuff, where the living want to hear from those that have passed on. But is that a thing the other way round as well? So, like, spirit may want a living relative to know that they're okay at a specific time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, often when messages come through, it's because it's a specific date. I'll say that again, specific date. As with Lucy, I mean, her father came through, and it was just 2 days before, 2 days after, or 2 days before. Yeah, I think he died on the 6th of December, or he on the 8th, and he came through on the 6th. So she was depressed because she unconsciously knew that, and he was, I guess, trying to comfort her. So that was a classic example. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bill's got a question. I'll read it out for speed. Have you been involved in the scientific and medical network? My understanding is this is a national organization comprising mainly of doctors and scientists who are interested in parapsychology.
I received their emails. I went to their one of their meetings, Beyond the Brain. I met Professor Gary Schwartz there. I suppose you've heard of Gary Schwartz. He's, he's a very interesting guy, but he's quite elusive. When you try and email him, you never get a reply, which is quite interesting. So a few of us start to have a few doubts about Gary Schwartz. I'm not, because he doesn't really sort of respond to things. They're great. Professor, what's his name? Peter Fenwick's there. Some very interesting people. I'm not a member. I am sort of a member, but they send me emails. The thing is, my professional life has been so busy trying to fit all this in and doing on call and seeing patients is quite knackering. So I decided that there's only so much you can do. I'm not a member of the SPR. And I think one of the reasons I'm not is because I've decided, although I am not a scientist, I want to make this plain. People say, "Oh, Ian, you're a man of science." I'm not. I'm an experiencer. And this is not science. If it was science, I'd be doing randomized control trial. I'd be doing this, that, and the other. I'm not doing any of that. I want to experience it. I want to find out what it's like. I'm on a personal journey. I'm not going to work out the science behind it. I've got some ideas, but I'm not going to do science. This is actually an experience for me. And I'm a practical guy. Amazingly, I never thought I was. But actually, I want to use this practically within the therapeutic setting. And it doesn't matter if it's not real. What matters is the results. It becomes, if you like, a therapeutic technique. It's nice if it's real, but actually for me, what I want to do is provide comfort for people. Now, people will say, well, supposing it's not real, you're providing false comfort. Well, who knows? If it's not real, we'll never know. If it is real, we will know. So, I suppose that's how I justify it. But I've been a practical doctor for so long. Science was something I did. I understand the scientific method. It informs my work, but I'm not a scientist. So yeah, I'm a member of the Ghost Club, which is I find more interesting. And I used to go to meetings there before lockdown because it's more narrative. I'm more into the narrative of it, what it actually means, the things it stirs up within one. I think that's quite valuable. I'll leave it to the scientists to sort of rack their brains about it. They've been going around in circles for years, and they probably will still continue to go around in circles.
And to be honest, them doing that gives us more to talk about, doesn't it? So once they start finding answers, then we kind of evaporate into the background. So that's good going. Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of out of time. Thank you again so much, Ian. That was a fascinating talk. Really enjoyed it. And thanks again for everybody who gave questions and stuff. Again, apologies. Sorry it was a bit ramshackle to start with. It was all quite last minute, and I was trying to get to grips with Zoom technology, which I haven't used properly for quite a while. But yeah, thank you so much for all of you. Next week, it's going to be Neil Nixon, talk about Roswell, ufology's greatest hits. So thanks again, Ian. Thank you, all of you. Have a great week, and catch you all next week.
Thank you very much. Nice meeting you all. Bye. Bye, Glenys.
Thank you, Ian.
Nice to see you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
John. Bye.
Night, everyone.